Perfect. So now I have the astrophotography tutorial. So this is just a quick overview of the steps. I'm going to go deeper into each one of these, but this is just kind of a quick look. So you're going to want to put the camera into manual mode, set the ISO to 3600, set your shutter speed to 30 seconds, set your aperture to your lowest setting, turn on your live view, and then adjust your focus. And if there are bright enough things in the sky, you can use automatic focus. Then you're going to want to take your photo using a remote shutter release or intervalometer. And then you're going to look at your photo and adjust all of your settings as needed. So now I'll talk a little bit deeper. I know that was pretty quick, so I'll talk a little bit more about it. So the first 4 steps, putting your camera in manual mode. Normally that's done. The camera I have, and I think a lot of other DSLR cameras, has this little knob at the top, and it gives you different modes. And on there you'll see letters, MASP, and you're going to want to switch it to the M, which is the manual mode. And what that does is it just means that you can adjust all of the different settings like manual or aperture aperture or shutter speed at once, whereas the other modes kind of prioritize one setting. So then you're going to want to set your ISO to 3600, and that's just kind of an estimate. ISO is, I don't fully understand it, if I'm going to be completely honest, but it affects how your camera processes light. So the lower your ISO is, the less light your camera will take in. So that's really good. Like an ISO of 100, which is the lowest, is really good for low light or really intense light settings, so like really bright days. But since we're taking pictures of the night sky where there's not a lot of light, you're going to want to set it higher. 3600 is just a good starting point. It really depends on how bright the sky is at the time you're taking photos. So that's what I just mean by variable. All of these settings are going to be that way. Yeah. So then you're going to want to set the shutter speed to 30 seconds. That just means how long the lens of your camera is open and processing light. So the longer your shutter speed is, the longer your camera lens is opening to take the picture, and the more light that will come in. So again, you're going to want a pretty long shutter speed. So 30 seconds is a good place to start. Again, depends on the light settings. That's part of the last step where you look at your pictures and kind of adjust everything depending on the light. Aperture, it varies depending on what kind of lens you're using. And it's measured in f-stops. You'll see all of this here on the picture. That top one is your shutter speed. So what that's saying is the shutter will be open for 1/60th of a second. This bottom one is the ISO, so it's an ISO of 800. And then this is the aperture. It's measured in f-stops, and it's an inverse measurement of how wide open your lens is. So the lower the f-stop, the more open your lens is, and the more light will be coming in. So again, dark setting, we want to have a low aperture. Make sure you're taking in as much light as possible. And then steps 5 and 6 are more about focusing. So turning on live view, it just means that instead of having to look through the viewfinder, that point where you're normally looking through when you're taking pictures, it will make it so that the screen displays what your camera is looking at. And that helps for a couple of different reasons. If you're taking a picture of a constellation or an object or the moon when it's close to the zenith of the sky, it's really hard to just like get in the right position to actually look through the viewfinder, because normally you're going to want to use a tripod when you're doing this, just so you have a steady camera. And it's kind of hard to, depending on the height of your tripod, to really get in and look at it properly if you don't have live view. And it can also make focusing a little easier, just because you can kind of see more clearly on your screen. And so yeah, and the next step is adjusting focus. You can use your automatic focus, but that only works when you have the moon out and bright, or when you have a bright enough subject. Because if there isn't something bright enough, your camera won't be able to really detect it and focus on it. But what's really nice, if you have the moon out and clear and you use automatic focus to focus on the moon, you can then turn automatic focus off and just leave your camera at the focus it was on, and then just swivel around and take pictures. And it should be at the same focus for the stars, since at that distance, it doesn't make much difference between the moon and the stars. So that's really nice for focusing. If you don't have that available, focusing really is just kind of trial and error. Monado will tell you, and Ori will tell you, focusing was definitely the hardest part of taking pictures, just because it's really hard to tell when you get it properly focused until you're done and you're looking at it on your computer and you are like, well, I did a terrible job. But you're really going to try and make it look like a point as much as possible. You want it to look like really sharp. And if it looks kind of blurry and well, out of focus, then you want to focus it more. And that really is just trial and error. And then steps 7 and 8, taking the photo using a remote shutter release or intervalometer. I also should have included, I said this before briefly, but you do want to use a tripod. And that is because when you have the shutter speed to lengths of 30 seconds, when your camera is taking a picture for that long, if you bump it or move your camera at all, then your picture is going to come out really blurry. And so you're going to want a tripod to stable it, and you're going to want to use something other than just pressing the button to take the pictures, because even just pressing that button, that little vibration can shake your photo a little, or shake your camera a little, and your photo might come out a little blurry. If you don't have something like that available, you'll probably be fine if you stay at the shutter speed range of like 30 seconds to a minute. You'll probably be fine, but it is better to have one of these. And then an intervalometer, I should have explained that first. An intervalometer is just, it's this thing on the right. It's something that you can plug into your camera and use it to program your camera so that it takes photos at certain intervals. So when Ori and I were doing our project last summer, where we were wanting to take pictures of the sky to view the light pollution and how it progressed, and like if there were clouds in the sky and just what it looked like, we would program these using the intervalometers to take pictures every 5 minutes. And it does that automatically. And it is also just has a button you can use to release the shutter to take the picture, so you don't have to press this button. So those are really handy. And then the last step, examine your photo and adjust settings as needed. So again, all of the numbers, the 30 seconds for shutter speed and the 3600 for ISO, those are just good starting points. But once you take the picture and look at it, you can say, oh, this is way too bright. And I should have written this down, but in my opinion, the thing you want to adjust first is if your photo is too bright, you want to adjust ISO first. You want to lower your ISO, because the higher your ISO goes, the more like grainy and kind of, yeah, just not as clear your photo will be. So I mean, if it's a really dark night, you don't really have much choice other than to use a high ISO, and just, your photos will come out a little grainy. But if you have some room and you can lower that, and if it's brighter than you expected, that's a good thing to lower first. But you can also adjust your shutter speed. If it's too dark, you can, if your photo comes out too dark, you can make your shutter speed longer and take more light in. That should help. Or if it's too bright, you can shorten that, and it should come out a little darker. And yeah, again, adjusting focus, it's really just trial and error. It can be a little frustrating, but it can also be rewarding. And so here are some pictures that me and our fellow Vice President Ori were able to take over the summer. Ori did that one. That requires some equipment. I think that's a little harder, but all of these were photos we took using these methods. Yeah.
If there's any questions for Max on either